As an entrepreneur, I depend on the tools and the equipment that I have around me to support the kind of lifestyle that I have. And I'm sure it's the case for you too. Even if you're not an entrepreneur, if you are a professional, if you are a developer, a designer, whatever your career or your profession is, your tools and equipment support you. One of the things that I wanted to do was to be able to work on the move. And that's where laptops and notebooks come in, right? The MacBook Pro, Windows, laptops, and all that, those are the things that allow us to work on the move. Whether you're at home or at a cafe somewhere or at your office, the same device can be brought around. I wanted to replicate that with an iPad. And this is the iPad that I got. It is a 12.9 inch iPad Pro, which makes it, almost 13 inches. That's the same size as a MacBook. My goal was to, or have this, replace my computer, especially if I'm on the move. My computer right now is a Mac Mini. I got the Mac Mini M1 and it's been a fantastic machine. And I wanted something to complement it because I didn't have a MacBook. So I thought an iPad would be perfect. It's roughly the same size. It's smaller, lighter, more portable, and has apparently the same features, the same access to the features, the apps that you would need. Or so I thought. This is going to be a review of the iPad Pro and how it works for an entrepreneur on the move. If you are an entrepreneur or a business owner and you want to rely on the iPad Pro, watch on to see my take on it and whether or not it will help you out. Hey, don't forget to give a thumbs up if you like this video. More importantly, drop me a comment and subscribe so that you'll be notified of future videos just like this. The iPad Pro is a fantastic device. Ever since the iPad came out a few years ago, it's been wonderful. Coupled with Pencil, you can do fantastic stuff with it. I use this all the time to take notes, to illustrate stuff. I do a lot of trainings online and through Zoom. I can connect on my iPad and really draw and illustrate what I mean and give an example of the concepts and the frameworks that I am talking about. So that's the great stuff. And I'm not going to talk much about that because you can literally Google it. The good stuff, the great stuff, that's all the positive stuff that's easy enough to find. You can get that from Apple's website or other YouTube videos as well. What people don't normally talk about though are the downsides or the things that don't really work very well. And these things sometimes are only apparent after you've been using the device for some time. This is my review of the iPad Pro for an entrepreneur who's been using it for 2 years. I've used it in Singapore, where I am based, using it to go to co-working spaces or cafes or restaurants or offices. And I've also been using it for traveling. So this is the only device that I bring along besides my phone. So here's what I think about it after using it for 2 years. If you're an entrepreneur just like myself, you realize that your day is filled with all kinds of tasks. Some of you might be even required to work on design stuff through apps like Photoshop, LumaFusion, or maybe you're a programmer and you've got to actually do coding. You've got to connect to SSH or whatever that is, right? Now the iPad theoretically can do all of that. The problem is in the details. So I think there are 3 main areas that I want to talk about that's a little bit lacking for the iPad Pro for an entrepreneur. The first is inconsistencies. If you are a user that depends a lot on, say, shortcuts or keyboard shortcuts specifically, you realize that the iPad Pro is a very immature device in that space. The iPad OS has been around for a while, but not for a very long time, and you can tell. You can tell because some apps simply don't support the keyboard features. Now, if you're using a Windows laptop or a Mac OS or a Mac computer, keyboard shortcuts work everywhere. Any app that you use, for example, Control F or Command F. Command F works. It's the find feature, and every single app that I know of supports that. Not necessarily the case in iPad OS though. I use things like Google Keep and like Standard Notes and like any other apps that I try. Typically what happens is they don't really support even the standard keyboard shortcuts. And that's a bit of an annoyance. It doesn't break everything, but when you are working sometimes with the inboard like folio and you wanna like, you know, work, it is so annoying when you break your flow and you're unable to perform the functions that you want. You aren't able to search for things. So that's one of the first things that I realized, inconsistencies. So that might just throw you off. That's one of the smaller grievances that I have about the iPad. The second thing is the much more serious issue with the iPad, and that is multitasking. So multitasking is a newish feature for iPad OS. I think it's about a year or two. They recently just released and just announced it in about 2020, I think. So while it's there, again, you can tell that it's a very immature technology because it literally just got released, and there's so many bugs and so many things that don't really work very well when it comes to multitasking on the iPad OS. Again, I'm going to compare it to how I use my Mac OS. When I want to switch between things, I command tab between my apps, or I basically just go to the dock and I just select the app that I want to get to. Not necessarily the case with the iPad OS though. Number one, the screen's pretty small. It is 13 inches, but it's still pretty small. And how iPad OS performs multitasking is that it allows for two screens in a split pane view. Theoretically, good, but the problem comes when you have to like manually drag windows there. And after a while, it becomes very annoying because it's hard to keep track of the windows that you open. More annoyingly so is that sometimes the keyboard focus and the cursor focus don't line up, don't match, right? Sometimes you see the keyboard focus on a certain app, say the app that you have on the left side of the screen, and you realize that when you perform a keyboard shortcut, the right app responds instead. So that to me is, again, something that just really throws you off. Now, in terms of multitasking, there is another bigger issue that could potentially be a deal breaker for you. It is a deal breaker for me because multitasking on the iPad OS is still a very you can tell that it's actually a single app with like different layers put upon it. What I mean is I do a lot of online training, Zoom specifically. When I run Zoom on the iPad OS, it is not the full desktop Zoom, it is the mobile version of Zoom or the iPad version of Zoom. And what happens when you share the screen is that you don't see anybody else. On Zoom, on the desktop, when you share the screen, you can still see a gallery view of the participants. That doesn't happen in the iPad OS. In fact, sometimes in the gallery view alone, you don't even see everybody because the iPad OS is limited to a certain number of participants. And I think the number is 4 or maybe 6, like a very, very small number of participants. And so I typically have to manually go to the next page and see the participants there. Or if I'm sharing my screen, I don't see the participants at all. And more annoying so, the participants don't see me because when you are multitasking, the camera shuts off. The camera is an app as well, and so there's only one app that's supposed to be in focus at a time. So that's the other thing about the iPad experience that has been tremendously disappointing for me. So that is the second point. The third point is unsupported functionalities. Now we are getting like in terms of importance and in terms of severity, it's increasing. Now, when you use certain apps like Safari, the browser, even Chrome, right? No matter which browser you use, you realize that when you are using it on the iPad OS, it is not gonna be the full desktop experience. I'm fine with that if things work. but things typically don't. And you never know when it will work or when it will never work. So I remember having to do work and I had to like submit forms and upload files and I don't know what else you do, like especially government websites as in Singapore. When you have to upload information, there's usually a file dialog. You click on that and it allows you to choose the files that you want. That typically doesn't work as smoothly on the iPad OS, and sometimes you don't know why. Sometimes you'll time out, sometimes it doesn't even respond, sometimes you don't even see the dialog. And to an entrepreneur like myself, I want things to work when they should. So that's not something that I can live with. And so when my OS or my device doesn't allow me to do that, it is incredibly infuriating. And that's something that I couldn't accept about the iPad OS. So one last point, file extensions. If you are working with file extensions or renaming files or attaching files, that experience is also terrible. And that functionality just isn't there in the iPad OS. On the Mac OS, on Windows, you can see the full file names. You can see all the files that you want. You save it to your file system and you can pull it up from any app. That process is so cumbersome on the iPad OS. Many times I've accessed my email and tried to attach a file, but ended up attaching the wrong file instead. And that's again not something that's acceptable. It just takes too much time and too much uncertainty for me to really use this as my daily tool. So what do? Right now the iPad has been relegated to be just a note-taking and media consumption device. I use it still a lot. There is no device that I found that is as good with a stylus, and that's something that I can use with my Mac OS on my desktop. I just won't be able to use this as my sole or even my secondary device on the move. So most likely a MacBook is still going to be necessary, especially with the new silicon architecture, the new MacBook Pros that are coming out. I think that's something that entrepreneurs still need to use. Otherwise, you're just going to tear your hair out if you're using an iPad OS. So hopefully that helps. If you like this video, let me know what you think about the iPad, if you're using that in your day-to-day work, what your takeaways are, how your experiences have been. If you like this video, please like this, share this, and more importantly, subscribe so that you'll be notified of any new videos that I put out. If you have any questions or if you have any topics that I should cover, let me know down in the comments below as well. Please take care, and I'll catch you guys soon.